You're about to listen to an archived episode of The Night Shift with Zeno Horoman. This is brought to you commercial-free by the Surfcast Podcast. If you're interested in more historical, educational, and entertaining surf fishing content, check out weekly episodes of the Surfcast Podcast available today on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you get your podcasts, including www.surfcastpodcast.com.
Today I have a distinct pleasure of having Mike Fixter, one of the most influential plug builders from the West Coast. Mike, welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you, Zeno. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, thank you for what you're doing.
I wanna get right to something that most of us are probably curious. As growing up in Northeast, for most people, they're used to striped bass fishing and that kind of a fishery. But you are in California. Was this always the fishery that you did?
No. I was born in Hawaii.
Oh, wow.
And my fishing started there at age 3 with a cane pole, no fishing reel, just like a 14-foot long cane pole. I could barely hold the thing up. And about, 12, 14 feet of line.
Whatever string you needed to get to the water.
Exactly. And I would fish in the tide pools. Well, my father was surf casting for Giant Trevally. Well, that was my start. And then when I was about 5 years old, we moved to California. And we did a tremendous amount of fishing from the shore in Monterey Bay, which is about 75 miles south of San Francisco. We caught all sorts of fish, except we never caught any striped bass. We were not aware of the fact that there was striped bass in Monterey Bay, much less how to fish for them. We always heard about the striped bass fishing up in the Pacifica area, which is about 65 miles north of where I live. Sharp Park was the big name back then. And we just never made it up there to go, striper fishing. And so I didn't catch any stripers until 1969. That's when I really got into striper fishing. And then in the mid-'70s is when I started building the lures.
Wow. Was the reason that you haven't been catching stripers is because you maybe used the bait or you used different techniques or you fished where they weren't, or it was just a matter of, bad luck?
No, we were fishing in the wrong places. I know on the East Coast, the rocks can be very, very good. And some places around here, the rocks can be good. But for the most part, the areas that we were fishing were not productive striper areas. We were fishing in heavy kelp, using big chunks of squid or abalone for bait, catching all sorts of rockfish and lingcod, capizone, bluefish, sea trout, you name it. We caught just about all of them except for striped bass. We didn't know how to fish for them. We didn't even know that they were around. But there was some extremely good striped bass fishing back then that I've read about, and talked to old timers that, they just drilled the, 30, 40 pound fish were not uncommon back then, especially around the mouth of the Salinas River. Just tremendous striper fishing. I never even knew about it until 1969.
Before we get into the lures, what you're famous for, and obviously you're famous as a fisherman itself, but to the East Coast guys, you fished on the East Coast. I know you have. How different, and what's the difference between Pacific fishing to the East Coast fishing?
First of all, I have to be honest with you. I never have fished on the East Coast.
Okay.
Gary Hull and I, we walked down and looked at the water. Kevin Closa went back and he took good care of me. Well, so did Gary Hull. Whenever I went to the shows back there, those guys would let me stay at their place, drive me around. I got to see, quite a few of the areas in New Jersey where they fish for stripers, but I've never casted a line there.
But you have to have some idea what's the difference just by talking to the people, I assume, and by building lures.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a lot more variable, so to speak, on the East Coast. The the configuration of the coastline allows you to go to one spot when it's windy. And then if the wind is wrong, you can go somewhere else. Where the majority of places we fish here on the West Coast, when the wind comes up, it's usually out of the northwest. And when it gets a strong northwest wind, it blows your plug back at you, puts a big bow in your line. And for the most part, you can't get away from it. There are a few places where you can go hide behind a point and fish a little bit, but that's the main thing. Is when the wind comes up, it's hard to get away from.
I also believe your waves are a lot bigger than ours.
Oh yes, absolutely. I fished the other day in conditions that I normally would just not even bother with. But some fish were being caught, not big fish, not very many of them, but I just decided I wanted to go try. The faces on the waves, in some cases, were probably 8 to 10 feet, and it's just constant whitewater rolling in, where you couldn't throw wood if you had to. It just bring your plug right back to you. You had to use 1.25 ounce bucktail minimum, and that's the big difference. Is mainly the size of our surf. You can get away with it sometimes if there's, 14 to 18, 20-second intervals between swell. Because then you got a little bit of time to work your plug before the next wave comes along and washes it back to you. But a lot of the time you get that strong northwest wind and the swell's close together, 6, 8, 10 seconds. It's extremely difficult to throw any topwater stuff. So you got to go to a bucktail or something subsurface.
Tell me what the progression is to a lure building from a fisherman. Now, how did you even get to make your own lure? Was it because it wasn't available, what you wanted to use, or was it just a passion that you found?
Well, both. Originally, when I first started fishing for stripers, some of the tackle shops in the area had a Stan Gibbs pencil popper. I didn't even know what a pikey was. Didn't have a clue. And so anyway, at this point, I still didn't know that there was very good striper fishing in Monterey Bay. So I would drive the 65 miles north up to Pacifica and fish up there with my Stan Gibbs pencil popper. And I ran into some guys, Chris Morello from Winchmaster Lures, Harry Bodie, who's passed away recently, and a number of other guys that would typically get in a wetsuit and swim to the rocks and then cast off the rocks. And they were oftentimes using pikeys. And so I shopped around trying to get a few, and I got a couple, but they were hard to come by. And so I decided, well, I'm going to start making my own lures. And so the first lure I ever made was a pencil popper, and it was made from an oak hoe handle that I bought at a hardware store. It was through drilled, and the through wire was 220-pound test monofilament. And that was about 4.5, 5 feet long. And it also was incorporated as my leader. So instead of using wire, it was 220-pound mono, and it was long and part of my leader. And that lure was uglier than a mud fence, I'll tell you. But it caught fish, I didn't even have any weight in the damn rear end of the thing. Just oak, was hard enough or heavy enough to give me reasonable distance. And so it just kind of progressed from there. Then I looked at some of the pikeys the guys were using, and I thought, I gotta try and make some of those. And so I continued to make pencil poppers out of oak or any other kind of wood that I could scrounge up. And so those, progressed fairly well. And then I started making the pikeys, and I'd bring a batch, half a dozen, not a batch, but half a dozen, or maybe a dozen of them up to this parking lot at Muscle Rock. That was where most of the fishermen would congregate back then. You could park up there and you could look miles and miles in either direction, see if there's any bird activity or whatever, And I would put these plugs in the hands of a couple of guys that were real good fishermen. Chris Morello, Harry Bodie, John Duty, just a bunch of good guys that knew how to fish a pikey. And I'd have them give me some input. Hey, is this thing swimming right? Well, no, Mike, it rolls over. All right, how do I fix that? All right, I put some weight in it. Okay, go back up there, give it another try. Mike, does it swim right? Well, it's swimming better, but you need to put a little bit more meat in the rear of this plug, And anyway, they gave me all kinds of real valuable feedback how I could improve the action on my plugs. So I went back to the drawing board and kept working on it until I got it, pretty damn good. And I would go up to this Muscle Rock parking lot with 10, 15, 20 of them, and I'd sell them at that time. This is probably about 1974. I'd sell them for $12 a piece. And I thought I was making pretty good money, and nobody was bitching about the price, So I just, kind of, progressed from there. And then I, eventually, stumbled on to Alaskan yellow cedar. This friend of mine, Donnie Cornelia, he was snooping around in a lumberyard, and there's this tarp over a pile of wood. He lifts up the tarp, and here's this true 2x4 wood. He didn't even know it was Alaskan yellow cedar. So anyway, he bought a piece, made some lures out of it. I showed him how to make lures. He says, "Hey, Mike, check this stuff out." So I got some from him, made a few lures out of it. I thought, holy smokes, this is exactly what I want. In my opinion, this was the very best wood that I've come across so far. I had just the right weight to buoyancy ratio. It didn't soak up very much water. It just turned beautiful, sanded nice, painted nice. For me, in my opinion, it was the right wood for what I was doing. So anyway, I started making them out of Alaskan yellow cedar, and the lips and stuff like that at that time, I cut them all by hand. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pikey lips, all cut by hand. You wound up with forearms like Popeye the Sailor after cutting all that stuff, because it was heavy gauge. And things just progressed from there.
So you were using pikeys, or the guys were using pikeys before you started making it. What pikeys were they using? Creek chubs or homemade?
Creek chub.
They were making creek chub. Okay.
Creek chub giant pikeys. There was another fellow, Hank. I want to say his last name was Morioka, something like that. But anyway, he made some pikeys, some really big pikeys. And his paint jobs were bar none. I don't even know if airbrushes existed when he was making them way back then. But his work was just absolutely gorgeous. I never had one of his plugs. I never swam one of his plugs, but I've seen them, and they look like they would work just fine. But he's the only guy that I know that was making pikeys.
In some way, you are credited with not inventing using yellow cedar, but one of the first guys to use a yellow cedar in a plug building. So that's obviously a huge thing for anyone, considering how many people use today. I'm curious about when you were making your lures, or when you started making your lures, were you aware of the lures that the guys were making on the East Coast, or you were just you were doing your own thing for your own benefit?
I was completely unaware of much of anything that was happening on the East Coast, other than I know that, the striper fishing back there was real good. But my influences were the Stan Gibb pencil popper, the Creek Chub striper strike, and the Creek Chub giant pikey. Those basically, when I started making pencil poppers, I did nothing more than, once I got started and had a little bit of an idea what I was doing, I did nothing more than copy Stan Gibbs, to be straight up honest, and then I modified it a little bit, I changed the shape, but there's really not much you can do to modify a pencil popper.
Well, no, that's true. I have seen your pencil poppers over the years, and I can kind of pick it out of the crowd because it's a little bit thin on the top. So I've always kind of known your style, and plus your painting styles too. Why pikey though? I mean, what is so about pikey that you wanted to make or not be known? You're not known by the plug. You're known because you like making a plug. So why a pikey?
Well, they were intriguing. There's much more to making a pikey than there is in a pencil popper. And the guys that were getting the majority of the big fish casting off the rocks, well, anywhere that there was any big fish around, were getting them on pikeys. And I just figured this is the challenge. I'm going to figure out how to do one of these damn things and, just go from there. But I also made a lot of just basically, here again, a copy of Creek Chubb's Striper Strike. First fish I ever got over 35 pounds was on a plastic Creek Chubb Striper Strike. But I'm 100% self-taught. There was nobody around, within, miles and miles and miles that was building lures. Just that one fellow that I know named Hank, I was mentioning earlier about making the beautiful pikeys, but he never showed me anything. Nobody ever, showed me any hands-on about how to do it. They just gave me feedback on how the lure could be improved. The pikey was a challenge. It was intriguing. Just the action, on a pikey that swims real good is fun to fish for me. I just like to watch the way the lure performs.
I'm going to assume, since you were self-taught, that there was a lot of failures along the way.
Lots of firewood, lots and lots of firewood, kindling.
I bet.
Yeah.
People says, well, you live in California, you don't need any firewood, but you live up north and it gets a little chilly up there. Okay, well, what's the state of striper fishing now in California?
The state of striper fishing right now in California is less than pathetic. It's an absolute shame, the state of our striper fishery right now. In the last 20 years, it's just taken a huge dive. The people that manage our fish and wildlife right now are of the opinion that the striped bass is part of the reason why our salmon and steelhead fishery has gone downhill. It's their contention that the striped bass eat the baby salmon and baby steelhead, which, to the best of my knowledge, is bogus. It's scientifically been proven that they do not forage on them as their main diet or anything else like that. Fish and Game will plant a lot of these small salmon and steelhead in areas where stripers are known to be. Well, heck yes, they're going to eat them. Rethink how you plant the salmon and steelhead. It's not the striper's fault by any stretch that the salmon and steelhead count is down. The spawning conditions have been horrible. The drought situation has been really tough. That's part of the reason why the salmon and steelhead count is down. Some of the planting and restocking programs that our Fish and Game Department has for salmon and steelhead is idiotic, in my opinion. If you ever get a chance to watch the video called Unspawned, it's put together by the Northern California's Guides and Sport Fishermen's Association. That video is absolutely flawless. It's 100% fact. No opinions, no BS, just straight fact about what's happening in our salmon and steelhead fishery. So anyway, the Fish and Game Department is not interested in doing anything to improve our striped bass fishery. There is something on the books right now that NorCal Guides and Sport Fishermen Association is pushing forward, and that is the slot limit of between 20 and 30 inches. Now, Fish and Game so far has accepted that, but whether or not it's going to actually get printed up in the next pamphlet, of all the rules and regs, fishing regulations, is yet to be seen. But right now, that the NorCal Guides Association and Sport Fishermen, they are our voice. They're an extremely well-organized group, and they're doing their absolute best to keep our striper fishery alive. But unless Fish and Game changes its stance and they take some huge efforts to restock our striper fishery, it's on the way out. I fish hard, and I know where big fish are. This year, I don't think I broke 14 pounds.
Wow.
I do not know of one fish taken between 20 and 30 pounds. I know of one fish that I'm guessing was probably 35 pounds, caught on a pencil popper in Monterey Bay. The numbers of fish that were taken this year were pretty good, better than an average year for the average fisherman. But most of those fish were between 24 and 26 inches. If you got a 30-inch fish, it was the talk of the town.
It sounds like an old same class of fish.
Yeah. The big fish are not there. Something else that is really a thorn in my side is the fact that Fish and Game allows striped bass to be speared in the Sacramento Delta and adjoining waterways. So now these great big females, what few we have left, become a trophy for these lunatics that want to spear them. It's legal. It's on the books. You can do it. But here you have this 30 or 40 pound striper or bigger that comes into spawn, and some fellow skin diver comes along and spears it. So the number of big stripers that have been taken in that waterway over the last few years has gone way, way down. These are all our big spawners, and they're spearing them. It shouldn't have got on the books. I have no idea how that ever got passed. It's about as sporting as going out and shooting a milk cow standing in the middle of a field. You don't say, "Hey, look at me, I'm a hero. Look what I did." It's very sad.
I can see why would you be concerned with that, and why would that bother you? I mean, we have our own issues up here, and spearfishing is probably one of our smallest problems, but we have other issues, and I think the fisheries in general are on a decline because we kind of got comfortable. And listen, it wasn't fault of a fisherman. I think there's so much environmental impact that goes on that we can barely keep fisheries as is, never mind to improve them, but we would like to keep what we have and tell our kids, at least, or show our kids, look, this is what your dad did all your life, where not, there used to be this kind of species before. So I can definitely understand why you have strong feelings about it.
Yeah, one thing I would like to mention is that the catch and release philosophy has come a long way in the last couple of years. So you go into some of these communities where their heritage, or whatever you want to call it, a lot of it is based around eating fish. And so you have these different groups that catch and kill everything they can. But that is changing. They're becoming a little bit more aware of the fact that if you want to take your grandkids fishing 10 years from now or whatever and expect them to catch a striped bass, you cannot kill them all. And Orlando has played a huge part in that. I mean, a huge part. I mean, he went into one of these communities, a sport fishing group made up of this community that was almost always catch and kill. Here you got this guy, Orlando, he's got the balls enough to go and talk to these people about catch and release. I mean, that's goddamn near unheard of. And he gets invited back for a second time to talk to him. He gave those people a tremendous amount of information. So that's gone a real long ways. And I hope it continues that way. So he deserves a lot of credit.
That's great. When you say Orlando, though, people don't know who that is. So
NorCal Cat.
That's
NorCal Cat. Orlando Compost. NorCal Cat.
Orlando. Okay, we know. All right, so we heard of him, and we're hoping to talk to him soon. Now, let me get back to the plugs just for a second here. I understand the whole, I appreciate your filling us in on how it all started. Now, let me ask you something. Let's go back to the plugs. At one point, you were one of the most popular builder in the universe in the East Coast. Like, how did this happen? This was just about as the internet was taking off at the time, but somebody must have helped you along the way, because you were not you're still not a self-promoting guy.
No, I let the lures do their own promoting. I can't say for certain, how many lures I'd sent to the East Coast to fishermen before I became aware of Stripers Online. That was probably the main thing that got things going. You'd read a discussion on there and somebody might be talking about, a certain type of lure, and eventually pikeys would get talked about. And so I would try to give them, my 2 cents worth on pikeys. And some of the guys got interested in, Gary Hull, Dave McLeod, Bassmaster, Dave Manzi, and a number of other people, including yourself, got word that, that I made pikeys and that some of these guys wanted to give them a try. And so anyway, I sent some back there, and it just kind of perpetuated from there. It was quite a few years later, but I do remember one of the shows at Asbury. I took 600 plugs back there with me. And you approached me and you said, Mike, I'd like to buy everything that's left over that you don't sell. You remember that?
Yeah, I remember. That was an Asbury show. Yeah.
Yeah, Asbury show. And so anyway, you bought everything that was left, and I sold 600 lures, man. I was a happy camper.
Yeah, I think there was
a
a few
great
pencil
show.
poppers left over or something like that. You had a great day. You used to have a long lines.
I did. I was right next to Gary Hull, and oh my God, we were.
Yeah, you keep
crazy.
mentioning his name and the guy from Massachusetts that makes this big surfs. There's McLeod. Some of these guys, like I keep thinking, even as I'm speaking to you right now, we just found out that Bill Couch passed away today.
That's a bummer.
CCW guy. Yes, he passed away today. I just read it literally before I just got on this Zoom call.
Yeah, it wasn't too long after the first or second Asbury show that I believe it was him, Bill. He said that I had influenced him a bit in some of his plug building. So he sent me a pikey, absolutely gorgeous, just a freaking work of art. And then he sent me another lure, another metal lip swimmer that he had a face on it like a river runt. And it's concave on both sides of the face. It's a hard plug to build right. Anyway, he sent me one of those. His craftsmanship was just fantastic. And so anyway, yeah, I'm sure that's who we're talking about here. Anyway, it was wonderful to know that I'd give him some inspiration to build some of these plugs, and he built a couple and sent them to me. It's wonderful, beautiful stuff.
I think you have inspired a lot of people in different ways over the years, including Orlando, who we're going to speak with in a little while also, and many other guys. Is this you? I don't know, and please, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't know if you ever sold plug commercially in a tackle store, if this was ever part of your business, but I always assumed that you did this more as a fun thing on the side than it was as a business, right?
Yeah, more of a fun thing on the side. Tackle shops have approached me, but it's so much easier for me just to sell direct. I don't know how much of this you want to put in your final product, but a long time ago, I was selling some lures off the beach to the fishermen next to a tackle shop that was on a little wharf close to the town of Moss Landing. Well, the owner of the tackle shop approached me and he says, "Hey, do you have a business license to sell lures?" And I told him, "No, I don't. This is the second year I've ever tried to sell lures. And if it becomes profitable, then I'll go get a business license, a resale license, and all the good stuff. And by the way, if you'd like to buy some of my pikeys, I'd be glad to sell some to you at a little bit discounted rate, because I know that you got to mark them up a little bit to make a profit." He wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. All right. So we kind of went our separate ways. And a couple of weeks later, I get a phone call from the state franchise tax board that tells me, "Mr. Fixter, you have an appointment with us at such and such a place at such and such a time and such a day, and you will be there." All right. So off I go. I get down there. The guy that I interviewed me and asked all these questions was really cool. He just was trying to, find out exactly what happened and get their share of what they would typically get had I had all the right paperwork and submitted what they had coming from sales tax. So anyway, I went and, I wasn't completely honest with them, but anyway.
Nobody ever is.
You might not want to put all that in this, but at any rate.
This was what, 30 years ago, 40 years ago?
At least, yeah.
Okay, I mean, seriously.
A long time ago. So anyway, I went and got all the required stuff. I had to have a business license, a resale license, and what have you. And I went back down there and I told the guy at the tackle shop, okay, I offered to sell you my plugs at a lesser price. You turned me down. I know goddamn well you were the one that ratted me off the state franchise tax board, but now I'm legal. So I'll tell you what, pal, I'm going to sit right down here on the beach and I'm going to sell every goddamn pikey I possibly can. That pissed him off. But what was the best part about it is this guy was trying to catch stripers on stuff he had. He couldn't catch a striper to save his butt. And people that were throwing my poppers and striper strikes and pikeys were just loading up. They were all getting fish. And so anyway, long story short, I'm still around and he's long gone.
Yeah, and I also think our government's got a little bit more important shit to do these days than going back 40 years to exactly. Mike Fixter plugs. So for someone who this is not primary business, what is the best part about building lures? Is it you catching the fish on it? Is it people telling you that they caught fish on it? Is it people that you inspire? Which one is it?
Well, I think the most rewarding part is to get feedback, from fellows that have bought my lures. Hey, Mike, I bought a lure from you a year ago and you've been doing really well on it, But that's very rewarding. Something else that's rewarding is to take someone, say like Orlando, and get him interested in plug building, and then he gets going on it. And then we exchange information back and forth, and he's very, very thankful, very appreciative of what I've showed him. And so that's rewarding. There's been a couple times where I helped people out and it kind of backfired, because they would try copy my stuff. There's one individual, I let him work and you can put this in your, and for all I care, there's just one individual named Bill. I won't say his last name. I let him come into my shop, build lures, recondition lures. We fished together for years and years and years. And that no good son of a bitch, what he did is he got some pikey blanks somewhere. He painted them up. And for years, my lures were identified by a little bit of red glitter under the chin. There was no signature, no nothing. If you got one of those lures with the red glitter under the chin, it was made by me. Well, this character, he put red glitter under the chin of those lures. All right. So immediately people and he put them out on the internet for sale. People see that. Hey, wow, there's a Fixter pikey. I'd like to get that. And so they buy it and then it arrives in the mail. They look at it. It's like, this doesn't quite look right. So they send me an email with a picture of this plug. Hey, Mike, did you make that? I look at it close. No, I didn't make that. The craftsmanship on it is crap. It's not mine. They didn't sand it properly. They didn't round off the edges. The paint is crap. The finish is crap. Just because it's got a red glitter under the chin don't mean it's mine. And so anyway, I put the word out on the internet, exactly what this bastard was up to. And he continued to pull shenanigans for quite a while, but eventually the word got out, about what this guy was up to. And now, almost nobody that I'm aware of likes the guy or is willing to do business with him anymore.
I think there's one question that I didn't ask, and it's probably the most important question for everybody listening to this. And this is, how do you actually fish pikey? There's got to be something that, well, obviously there's a lot that you can share, but what do you find that you would, if you were going to teach a guy how to fish a pikey, what is it that you would concentrate on?
Okay, first of all, I would tell him there's quite a learning curve. Pikey can be very versatile in the right hands. Okay, first of all, the pikey has to be made properly. Okay, I like to fish a pikey slow. Slow is, in my opinion, the right way to fish them. The slower it goes, as long as it has that nice, sexy tail wag, and just a moderate roll. Just casting the pikey takes a little bit of practice. They're not known for casting a long way. Just the way you come around with your swing on your cast, it starts to tumble a little bit in the air. You can put your finger down and, feather the spool a little bit to try to get tension on the front of the plug, so it'll track straight. So anyway, you got to cast the thing right. My favorite place as far as fishing off the beach with a pikey is concerned is to look for a deep spot. The water typically, and where I fish, sweeps from right to left. And if I can find say a sandbar where the water is sweeping off the sandbar and spilling into a deep spot, I like to put the pikey right on the edge of that sandbar and let it swing with the current into that deep spot and not even retrieve, just hold a little tension on it, let the pikey wiggle and do its own thing and in that current until it sweeps over into the more calm water, and then I'll start my retrieve. And you can, let it sit there a minute, twitch it a bit, before you start your retrieve. Once I start my retrieve, here again, I'll go nice and slow. And I like to add a constant twitch. Not like working a pencil popper, but just a constant twitch. So you get that nice, sexy tail wag and a moderate roll, but then the lure is also kicking around a little bit like an injured fish that's about ready to go belly up. And it's making noise. So I think it's attracting the fish quite a bit more. Just a slow retrieve with that steady twitch. Yeah, sometimes I'll stop the twitch, and I'll stop the retrieve. Maybe I'll speed it up a little bit, slow it down a little bit. But when I test these lures, every single metal lip lure that I make, I test. Every single one of them. There's a pond next to my house. I'll drive over there. I will test swim every single metal lip, so I know 100% certain that thing swims right. Granted, I'm testing it in fresh water. It's going to swim a little bit. It might swim a little different or behave different in the salt water where there's some current and wind and all the other crap. But I know that it's going to swim right. That lure has to swim right on its own without any influence or impact, added to it by me, like with no twitch, with no anything added. So that way, if one of these lures, gets in the hands of a person that doesn't know how to use it, if he just casts it out and reels it in straight and slow, it's a good chance he's still going to catch a fish because the action on it is right. Well, I'll back up just a minute. Another, great place to fish a pikey, and on our beaches, a lot of times there'll be an outer sandbar, and then in closer there'll be a trough, or what I call a trough, that runs parallel to the shore. And it might only be 3 or 4 feet deep, sometimes even shallower. And the trough will run parallel to the shore until it gets to a certain point where it'll make a 90-degree turn and go straight out in a rip. Well, these fish, the stripers, will use that rip as a highway. They'll come right in that rip and then it'll go up that trough. And the tide and the current sweeping from right to left will be carrying bait fish or something for them to eat. Where I fish, a lot of times the predominant food is sand crabs, what they call a mole crab. And the stripers will just gorge themselves on that. But if you put a pike in front of them, they're going to forget those sand crabs and they're going to hit that pikey. And so I love to fish those troughs, with the pikey. And a lot of times those fish will go from the deep end of that trough all the way up until where it runs into the sandbar. And as the tide gets higher, they might move further up to the right. As the tide drops, when you get less water, they're going to move down to the left, so they're not in like super shallow water. So that's another area where I just love to fish those pikeys. Another place is you might have a long, flat area of beach. And then you see just a slight depression where the waves will subside ever so slightly. And typically that means that there's a little bit deeper spot there. And I'll just cast the plug off to the right of that little depression and let the current move the plug slightly over to the right and get right in the sweet spot and start my retrieve. And oftentimes that's right where those fish will be, eating sand crabs. North of where I live, when I used to swim to the rocks and cast pikeys from there, it's a little different scenario. You might be out on this rock and you're casting toward other rocks, or you're casting toward the deep water, or you're casting toward an area where our fish are known to want to just go in there and rest, and just kick back and take it easy. It's a bit different fishing around the rocks than it is off the beach.
All right. In closing, I want to know something. What is a heyday of striper fishing? What does it look like? Describe me a scene of what the heyday of striper fishing in California used to look like.
Okay. You pull up to the parking lot at Fly Shackers. It's by Fly Shackers Zoo in San Francisco on Ocean Beach. You pull up to the parking lot, and off to your left is 30 or 40 guys. They're damn near all hooked up. You look straight in front of you. There's 30 or 40 guys. They're all hooked up. You look way up to your right. There's 30 or 40 guys, and they're damn near all hooked up. And you look up beyond them, and there's like 2 or 3 guys, and they're hooked up.
Wow.
So you get back on the highway, and you haul ass up to where the 2 or 3 guys are, because you don't want to fish where there's 40. And you go up there. There's fish falling out of the waves. They're just blitzing and busting like crazy. There's like hundreds of fish, just everywhere, fish anywhere from typically from 10 to 25 pounds and some 30s and 40s mixed in with them, and when there's that big of a crowd, a lot of times, not everybody can throw top water. It just becomes a tangled up mess. But if you work together, you can throw metal. So a lot of time we'd be throwing what they call a Mickey. It's just a metal lure, You throw a Mickey, a Hopkins, crocodile, anything. And, you're hooked up. And sometimes you're going to get a nice big 15, 20, 30-pound salmon mixed in. That was a real bonus to get salmon off the beach on surf casting gear. I can remember one day fishing with that same jackass that tried to tell people that he had pikeys, with a red dot under the chin. I was fishing with him off Muscle Rock. I was at Rockaway, which is right close to the town of Pacifica. He had 11 stripers that day and 3 salmon. And where we were fishing was off a high rock. When you hooked up, you had to go climb down to this low spot. The guy that was hooked up would stay up on top. He'd swing his tip of his rod over in your direction while you're down that low spot. You try to grab his shock leader and pull his fish up to where you could unhook it for him, and release it or throw it in this tide pool there where we would keep them nice and cool. They're still alive in there. And then he'd go back to fishing, and you'd climb back up to that spot. Well, every time I started to climb back up there, he'd say, "Mike, stay down there. I've got another one." So he did that for about 7 or 8 stripers, and I thought, screw this, man. I'm not going to stay down here. I'm getting my ass back up there. So anyway, I get back up there, and we're both catching fish and having a grand time. We got salmon, we got stripers, and back then the limit was 3. And we weren't too smart on, releasing fish. So now we've each got 3 stripers, each around 18, 20 pounds. And I had 1 salmon. Well, he had his 3 stripers plus 2 salmon. Okay. And so we got all these stuffed in our backpack or whatever means we could use to carry them out of there. And there was these kids there that had also got in on some of it. And the climb out of there is a nightmare, especially if you got 60 pounds of fish on your back. So anyway, we started to make the climb, and this jackass Bill that I was with, he got pooped out. He was flat ass pooped out. And he traded his bigger stripers for lighter stripers, smaller stripers from these kids. He gave the kids his bigger stripers for smaller stripers because he couldn't carry the weight. He probably went back the next day and loaded up again, that freaking bandit. But anyway, that was a heyday for certain. But and there was lots of them like that. I mean, I've had some extremely good fishing, but one of my most memorable years, I didn't catch a lot of fish that year, but this was in Monterey Bay, close to an area called Manresa, where there was 4 or 5 schools of monster stripers. That year, I had a 21-pound average, 1992, a 21-pound average. I didn't break 40 pounds that year, but I had so goddamn many fish between 35 and 38 pounds. You just wouldn't even believe it. You could walk down the beach, Zeno, on a calm morning, no wind, and you could see these great big black or dark purple, blue, big old blobs. And when people saw them, they thought it was a big school of bait fish. And I thought, no, I know what that is. And you could kind of just take your time. You couldn't reach them with a pikey most of the time. It was a 100-yard cast. I mean, you had to be a goddamn good caster to reach these fish. But anyway, they would just be hanging out there, like 5 or 6 big schools of great big fish. And you just pay attention to what direction they were moving, blast that pencil popper out there as far as you could, and then just work the edge of the school. Then 4 or 5 fish or more would peel off of that school and just annihilate your pencil popper. It was freaking out of sight good. And every now and then, those schools would move in close and get on top of those sandbars eating sand crabs early in the morning, before they got much sun on the water. And if you could spot them and present a pikey properly, you would get them. So anyway, that was an absolutely fantastic year. And there was another time in 1985 and another time in 77, but mostly in 85, we had an El Nino year where the water warms up. And so the bonita moved in. And I'm talking nice bonita, 10, 12, sometimes 14 pounders. You catch them on medium-sized spinning gear. It's an absolute ball. I mean, they fight like hell. Anyway, we are on our way. We had some bonita, but it was kind of slow. We're on our way back in. And this guy says, hey, wow, look at that great big school of anchovies over there. It's about the size of a football field. I kid you not. And I said, wait a minute. Don't be running the boat over that. And we get a little bit closer, and it's solid stripers, as big as a football field, and probably 4 or 5 fish deep. It was the goddamnest thing I've ever seen for stripers. And I was the only one in the boat. Everybody else was set up for bonita. I was the only one in the boat that had brought anything even resembling a striper rod. It was a Penn 650 loaded up with 20-pound strand mono. It was before I even started getting wise about braid, and a 10-foot ugly stick. I just happened to toss it in the boat just for whatever reason. And I had one pikey that I tossed in the boat just for whatever reason. I still can't tell you why. And that was it. So we pull up on those fish, and I make a cast to them. And it's like every fish in that whole school was trying to eat my pikey. And so anyway, long story short, hold it back up a little second. I landed, the first 2 I landed was a 38 and a 39 pounder. Okay. I have pictures of them, and I had a scale with me. We weighed them, took pictures. Okay. I killed both of those like an idiot, kept them both. And a few minutes later, I landed one that was 40.
Nice fish.
We weighed it, took a picture of it. I released it. So before that was over, I had hooked 9 and landed 7. The smallest was 26 pounds. The biggest was 40 on the dot. I could have caught 20 fish that day, easy, because after I landed the first couple, the other 3 guys in the boat, Mike, let me use your rod. And so I'd give them the rod. They'd cast the pikey. Most of them couldn't fish for stripers or throw a pikey or fish a pikey worth of shit. The fish would come up behind the plug and give it a good smack. They'd set up. They'd set the hook, and the pikey comes skipping across the water. I say, God damn it. I says, do not set that hook until you feel
let him eat it.
Distinct weight. then set the hook. So they missed strike after strike after strike. And while they were doing that, this other guy had a big old plastic Rebel and a medium-sized spinning gear. So I put that on, and I tossed it out there, and I just started twitching it around, trying to make it act like a pikey, and I was hooked up in no time. I says, here, take this goddamn rod and fish this. Give me my rod back.
Give me my rod back.
And so anyway, I wasted God knows how much time letting those other guys fish my plug. I'm certain that I probably would have got a fish well over 40 that day and caught at least 20.
Well, I hope that in our lifetime or in your lifetime, we get to see that kind of fisheries again. I want to thank you again for joining us, and I appreciate you finding time to do this. I really want everybody to know how the fishing is on the wrong coast, as we call it. But I know for a lot of us, it's a dream to come fish there, and for a lot of you guys to come fish here. And in some ways, it's all one sport, and it's all same way of doing it. And I am so glad that I'm able to just kind of highlight what you guys do over there, and not only in a way how, but where, and that at the end of the time when I'm talking to you, I realize that it's literally the same thing. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. I'm just tickled pink to be part of this. And I guess as my final few words on this thing would be, mostly to beginning striper fishermen, but also to older fishermen and new guys. Learn the fishery, understand the fishery, respect the fishery, and you treat it like you want to take your grandkids there someday and have them catch some fish. Thank you.
All right, Mike, tell us, what's the easiest way for people to contact you?
Just by email. I don't have a website or any of that, fancy stuff. I'm a Neanderthal.
Okay.
I don't do much high tech.
If you give me your email, then I can at least put it into the show notes so people can just click on it and contact you.
Okay. It's PikeyMike46 @gmail.com.
Well, at least you got a Gmail account, so you did come to the 21st century.
Yeah, I'm slowly moving into the 1980s. Yeah, PIKIEMIKE 46 @gmail.com.
I'll take care of it, and I'll put it in the show.
Okay. One other thing.
Yes, sir.
You were asking me about some of the things I enjoy about making lures. I actually enjoy turning the lures, even after doing it for 50 years almost. I still enjoy the process of working the chisel. I mean, I have so much muscle memory, I can just about do it blindfolded, but I still enjoy it. And, looking at the finished product as it comes off the lathe. I enjoy painting. I'm a rattle can guy. I gave my airbrush to Orlando. I hope Cyclone doesn't hear about that. Cyclone he gave me an airbrush trying to convince me to paint with an airbrush. I've tried them. They're wonderful. I mean, you can do all kinds of detail with them, but it's just not my, it's not my thing. I'm just a rattle can, old fart with a rattle can. But I enjoy turning them. I enjoy painting them. I really enjoy taking them for a test swim. I might take 100 plugs out for a test swim, and every now and then I'll get a couple that don't swim worth a crap, so I got to figure, all right, usually if it's a metal lip lure, the problem is with the lip. You change the lip around a little bit, now it swims fine. So to add to what I said earlier, those are some of the other things that I really enjoy, the turning the wood, the painting them, the test swimming. The assembly is a pain in the ass, I don't enjoy assembling them. It's just monotonous, tedious.
Hey, listen, I like my job, but I don't enjoy getting up at 4:30 in the morning to go to it.
Well, for 30 years as a firefighter, captain most of that time, I got my sleep interrupted a time or two.
I'm sure you have, and thank you for your service.
Station.
Thank you for your service, and thank you for your Navy service also. I wanted to mention that.
Oh, thanks.
And
I didn't know
while
you knew
I was
in
your
the
attention, I wanted to mention before a few times when we're doing this, Chris Moriello, obviously Winch, known to everybody else. I know you mentioned a bunch of times for people that don't know who he is. He's also a highly influential surfcaster in California. And I would love to have him on the show one day to interview him too. Today we did you. Next time we'll get him on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it'd be well worth your effort.
I know he would. I know he's
wealth
very
of
opinionated.
information. Oh yeah, you're going to get some of that.
And I love it. That's what
That
it's all
comes
about.
with it. You buy that ticket, you're going to get some winch.